This podcast is sponsored by Spacer Mobility. We talk a lot about the positioning of your hands and fingers when it comes to gymnastics, and it's no different with your feet and toes in weightlifting. We were fortunate to implement several Spacer Mobility products during our last Power Monkey camp, and we were able to reinforce the importance of using toe spacers and split wedge boards during warm-ups and some of our accessory components. Technique and mobility really does matter. We love Spacer Mobility's commitment to education, and we definitely identify with that here at Power Monkey. Their site hosts several articles and programs to help you maximize your foot health and more. If you've never tried toe spacers, rock mats, or their newest stability trainer, there's a great lineup of bundled packages to get you started on your journey for optimal foot health. Spacer Mobility's products are made with high-quality materials, ensuring durability and long-lasting comfort. So whether you're hitting the gym, going for a run, or just tackling your daily routine, Spacer Mobility has the tools you need to keep moving with ease. Head over to spacermobility.com today and take your first steps towards a more comfortable and mobile lifestyle. Please use the code PMC all caps for 15% off. Welcome to the Power Monkey Podcast, where we chat with the best in the world of fitness about what they do. I'm your host, Dave Durante, with my co-host, Mike Service, and on today's episode, we have a return guest, someone we have not had on in a number of years, and he has since become an absolute rock star in the space, and we love seeing all the success that he's had, Dr. Andy Galpin. Andy is a tenured professor at Cal State Fullerton. He is the co-director of the Center of Sport Performance and the founder and director of the Biochemistry and Molecular Exercise Physiology Lab. He is a human performance scientist with a Ph.D. in human bioenergetics and has written over 100 peer-reviewed publications and presentations. Andy has worked with athletes across the spectrum in terms of a variety of different Olympic and Major League sports. He is also the co-founder of Vitality Blueprint, Absolute Rest, Biomolecular Athlete, and Rapid Health and Performance. The guy is in so many different pertinent fields, and we had the opportunity to dive into some that are relevant to our listeners and to what we do on a daily basis in terms of technique. Very lucky to have Andy back on with us, and we hope you guys enjoy this one. All right, well, Dr. Andy Galpin, it's been 4 years since you were on the podcast last time. A lot has happened since then. You've absolutely blown up. It's amazing to see all the great things you're doing within the various spaces where you have a hand in, and we're just lucky to have you back on again. How you doing, buddy?
Fantastic, man. It's been a hot minute. I had a lot less dog hair on my shirt last time, but
Life changes, right? I hope it's not your own hair falling out, it's dog hair.
definitely.
So we have a lot we want to get through here, and there are just so many topics that we want to get through. We're going to chip away at this as best we can, so we just want to jump right in. And the first is just a couple definitions that we want to help see what we can get from you. Some terms that we've heard you use multiple times, and we just want to get some clarification on a few terminology pieces, and then we'll kind of dive a little deeper into some of these things. First, functional movement, or I'll just rattle them off. There's 4 of them. Take them as you will. I can kind of go back to them if needed, but functional movement, athleticism, longevity, and wellness. If you can kind of give a brief description as to how you view each of those within our space. We work with a lot of CrossFit and functional athletes, people who are looking to just become more capable for longer periods of time. So we're just kind of curious in terms of how you can help define a couple of those things.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually just at a speaking event last week, and somebody, like a non-athlete, normal person here, asked the same question. So I'll give you the same answer in terms of functional. Obviously, this is a word that a lot of us in the industry get very triggered by. All of us here are a little bit older, and so we remember kind of the early mid-2000s when functional really launched off, and people took this to mean like you have to be on a BOSU ball and you have to be like doing all these weird things for it to be functional. That was clearly not the best use case of that phrase. More importantly, now I also still get very triggered by it because it's a phrase that means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It means whatever it wants to mean to you. So how I interpret that is simply and in the case of exercise, functional exercise, is the exercise doing what you want it to do. That's it. So to me, I can make a very strong, hard argument that a leg press exercise, a leg extension, I'll make it worse, on a machine is incredibly functional. We could go over research, we could go over practical applications, but there's a trillion reasons why that could be a very high function. You could also make a strong case why that is maybe not the most useful exercise to choose in other situations. So honestly, I don't get too caught up in the term of functionality. It just means like, is it serving the purpose that you're after? I think what people try to mean when they say this is a combination of a couple of things. Number one, is that exercise actually leading you towards your goal? And that's an important conversation, right? And so in the case of a leg extension, if somebody is, say, highly athletic, highly strong, and trying to get, say, peak speed or improved power, is a single leg uh, isokinetic leg extension the best exercise only ever? Well, then our case is like, okay, there's probably better exercise choices, so they could be more functional, if you wanted to mean that. So that's the first use case of that. The second one is, are you making sure that really you are doing things that transfer into your sport or activity? But those are really what we're talking about, and that is a difficult thing to ascertain anyways. So showing transfer from the weight room to the sport is actually far more difficult than people realize, with the exception of when your sport is your training, in the case of weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit, things like that. So when you step outside of those realms, I traditionally focus more on actual, well, I didn't mean it that way, but more on ball sports and things like that. So function means to me, like, are we doing the thing we're trying to do? Getting stronger, getting faster, whatever, with the least chance of injury, then that is highly functional. So that is definition number one. What was the second one?
Athleticism.
Athleticism. It's the same thing. Like, I have a personal definition of it, but that's not my scientific definition of it. So when I think of athleticism, I want someone to be able to do as many different things with their physical body under their control as possible. So this is everything from being strong, being powerful, having high hand-eye coordination, being highly skilled. And so when I think of the people that are the most athletic, I'm thinking about somebody that can jump really high, somebody that can also control another person's body, somebody that can kick a ball, somebody that can do multiple things really fast, they can learn a new talent, somebody that can hit a golf ball, somebody that can run, land, jump, all those things. That is athletic to me. That's not necessarily the scientific definition of it. If you wanted to think it as simply people who have endurance, power, and strength, that's fine. If you want to have more wide-ranging one, if it wants to involve specific ball sports like I tend to involve them, that's great. But you can make an argument that that's not athleticism, being better at hitting a golf ball than somebody else. Okay, fine. But to me, growing up, and this is entirely, again, my bias, that's what we valued. Like, when I was like, you're more athletic than me, I'm like, okay, prove it. Let's do 15 different things. Beat me. Like, then you get to beat me, right?
Right.
And by different things, I mean stuff like that, including let's learn something that we've never done before. You need to run, you need to jump, you need to be flexible, you need to have all those things. So athleticism is that to me, personally. What was the next one?
Wait, I want to go a little deeper into that because
Okay.
first part is, if that's the case, I mean, it seems like a lot of these answers, I have it actually written down in my notes, is it depends. It
Oh,
depends. It depends is going to be the answer to a majority of these things, really dependent on the athlete, the case, the sport. There's so many things that go into the answer that's relevant for that particular person. But on the athleticism side, I kind of fall in the same category as you, kind of growing up and just being capable in a lot of different areas. But, CrossFit itself deems itself to be finding the fittest person on earth, or the person that's maybe most athletic. Decathlon claims that, the person that wins the Olympic gold medal is the most athletic person in the world. From your perspective, what sport is able to encapsulate athleticism at its highest level? Or is that such a thing in your mind?
um, yeah, I don't think either one of those. I mean, certainly CrossFit would not be behind that list for me. It's really not that varied. Like, you're doing deadlifts, you're doing pull-ups, and you're doing those repeated in different ways. And you're saying like who can handle the volume over a large number of days, which is brutally awesome. Like, people that get to the CrossFit Games are monsters.
Yeah.
And like, it's not a criticism at all. But the movements are not that varied. I mean, sometimes they've thrown in like the softball throw. I remember they did that a
Yeah,
couple.
one year, a long time ago.
They're going
Yeah.
way back.
It's like, it turns out really bad. Right? It's like, let's just stick to your deadlifting variations, your pull-up variations, and then throw in some biking and stuff, whatever. It's. I know it sounds like I'm totally, again, they're. It is so impressive what they can handle, volume-wise, right? But that's not any more impressive to me than the decathlon is a great example. Like you're doing a ton of different stuff, right? In either case, though, you have a fairly narrow scope. You're also never really challenging reaction time, right? Neither one of those has to react to an opponent and change. Neither one of those has to involve strategy or skill in terms of like there is strategy and skill within both of them. You know, you guys know what I mean? It's like who's
Sure.
making what play, who's going to be in this position, how are we reacting. So that's a huge component of athleticism. This is where ball sports, team sports, combat sports are going to have huge arguments over a decathlon, over a CrossFit. It's like, well, what do you mean? There's no real strategy to these things, right? Other than like pacing. But that's
Sure.
not nearly as complicated as something like if you take the case of NFL or high level football, the amount of mental anguish and strain and study and preparation that goes into football, it trumps any other sport by a billion miles. Strategy and having to decide what you're doing so quickly, even more than baseball. Baseball has a very fast reaction component to it on the individual player, on the individual pitch. But football has so many moving parts so fast. It's nowhere close to the other sports. So one could argue, hey, like I could go do your job, but you couldn't come and do mine.
Mm.
And we see that routinely, right? Like
Hmm.
football people can be super athletic and compete at decathlon, but you couldn't come over and match their. So I don't know. I'm not saying one of them was right, but they're clearly different. And so I couldn't necessarily give you an argument to say like one of these sports is a better representation of overall athleticism. The one that I'll come back to would be, let's take the case of mixed martial arts, right? You have to be all these things. You have to have endurance and timing and balance, and you have to have power and skill. But you take a lot of UFC fighters and you put them in a lot of other areas, and they're not like the most incredible athletes, if you will.
Hmm.
But you take other fighters and put them in combat sports, and it's like it's not even close. Like they just get totally dominated, right? They're not even competitive. So I don't know. You can have success in a lot of different ways. Take a guy like coming up soon, one of my fighters, Brian Ortega, is fighting. He would not blow anybody away with his vertical jump, his VO2 max, his body composition, his strength, right? But he will strangle anybody in a CrossFit game in seconds, right?
Hmm.
And I like anybody. So I don't know, like his flexibility, his body control. When we teach him new movements, he picks them up immediately. Like it's uncanny how fast he learns new things and he never forgets them. So I don't know, like you could argue he's not athletic, and then I could argue, but like just because he didn't get hyper focused in throwing a thing and jumping of a certain like I don't know. So to me, I don't know, who
All
knows?
relative.
It's all
It's all
great, man.
relative.
It's all super. It's all like rather than arguing who's more or better, I think it's all my perspective is like I just appreciate all of it.
Yeah.
I think it's dope when someone does one thing only ever,
Hmm.
like runs a marathon and gets like really, really good at skiing, like whatever. And you're like, no one in the world can do this one thing better than me.
Right. Yeah, those are kind of the worlds that we live in, right? Of just performing a handstand to the best that it possibly. I mean, every little nuance of what goes into being inverted and figuring out how to breathe appropriately and where the fingertips need to go and like all the little things that most people just gloss over. And, we become so involved in one particular space. And that definitely is where, us as experts in, or, our own definition of an expert in our particular fields kind of definitely appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, dude, think a look about actually your guys, Dave specifically, like think about gymnastics. It's not a matter of like who did this the most powerfully or who did this the fastest. This is like you have to do this in perfection. Like every single thing, because now you're being graded on also the style
Oh, yeah.
of it. And that's a massive component, right? And so it's like, how could you also ignore it's like, yeah, you just did it as hard as you can, but I had to do it perfectly. I was
Yeah.
literally being judged on perfectly. No one else is being judged on the
How it
perfect.
looks. Just get it
You made
done.
a shot in basketball, you made it, you get 2 points. Bounced on the rim 16 times or not. It didn't like, well, who went in better?
Yeah.
That's a whole like. So one could argue it's like, yeah, you guys get away with stuff we don't get away with.
Yeah,
Uh,
if you go watch a gymnast throw a baseball though, 99% of them it would be embarrassing to the point of them never wanting to pick it up again. So
watch a
good.
wrestler run.
All right. All
It's
right. I,
horrible.
I have to tell the story because it's kind of funny. When I was in college,
That's
we had
awesome.
2 weeks out of the gym. We weren't allowed to train for a couple of weeks, so we went and did other sports. So we went to work with the divers, we went to go work with the
Yeah.
wrestlers, we went to go work with the track and field team. just to kind of see if we could take anything back to our own sports. And the track and field team was like, okay, guys, coach was like, okay, let's do some, sprint drills. We're going to work on your speed. We're going to work on just some mechanics of you getting prepared for running down the vault runway. It's 70 to 80 feet, and we're going to see if we can actually build some speed for you to turn in some better vaults. He watched all of us run, and he made us go home. He's like, I cannot fix this. I was like, I can't. Whatever you have done up to this point is just not fixable. You guys are embarrassing. I can't have you on the track here. If anyone's filming or taking pictures, I can't have me associated with you guys running. It was terrible. We are just an embarrassing group when it comes to anything outside of our little niche.
Yeah, man, that's true. Like, so I come from a small town where I grew up. Everybody did everything. Like our offensive tackles in football could play golf. They could like you could kick a soccer ball. You could do everything. Not great, but like you could do it where it looks like you know what the heck you're kind of doing. When I got to college, I was expecting kind of like the linemen to not be very athletic in these different areas, and that held true. But I was stunned that the skill position guys, running backs, receivers, defensive backs, you watch them throw a football. And I was like, what on earth was your childhood like? Like, how are you a college wide receiver? And you, like, it looks like you've never thrown a ball of any kind in your life. They couldn't punt a ball. They couldn't snap a ball. I'm like, yo, where I'm from, everybody can at least, like, again, kind of do these things. That totally blew me away. So I hear it, man. Like when you
Hyper
specialize really,
specific.
you lose the ability to do just about anything else.
Hyper specific stuff. Mike, anything you want to add in from the weightlifting world? I know you're pretty capable in that sense, but
No,
you
I don't
play
know.
football as well.
Yeah, I don't want to go down all the rabbit holes, but these are all fun. I don't know. Anna, do you remember like the kick, punt, pass competitions you
Of
would
course.
have when you're like
Yeah.
little? So when we're all talking about like athleticism, and I think I definitely grew up with the same perspective as you. It's like, well, let's just try as many things as possible and see who's better. And you're like kind of making up your own decathlons, like
Yeah.
per situation. You're on you're at recess and you're just picking a bunch of random things to try and see who can do it better. And just this conversation in general just has me thinking, one thing I like about how you seem to describe a lot of things is not necessarily in absolutes, but a little bit in like, here's a situation, here's a lot of things that we know. And then like Dave said, like that, from you, I think as well, is like, and then it depends. And I think we're in such a, you used the word earlier, triggered, like everybody gets triggered so fast by saying something. Most people, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to ask you some of these definitions, is most of them, they're just words. Like they're just words that we slap onto something. And until you get into a specific situation, have some conversation about it, look at some different things, they really don't mean anything. And for us, I think that almost ad nauseum, we find ourselves trying to define poorly defined things to our community. So, we go in and, I'm in the weightlifting side. So somebody will show me a video of a world champion weightlifter and like, well, he does it like that. I'm like, well, yeah, he's a freak. Like
Yeah.
he's a world record holder. I would never teach somebody to lift like him. Like he has components of his lift that are amazing. But then he's so overdeveloped in other areas that he can do it and not you. So I'm more just kind of summarizing, I guess, my enjoyment for these types of conversations, and then trying to reinforce to our listeners that like dogmatics and black and white thinking and these absolute like truths, they're not there. Like the
No.
conversation is where the magic is.
You want to know a game I play with my students in this similar theme here? I always ask them, this is a senior and a graduate level class. And I always ask, hey, just define aerobic exercise. Good luck. Like, go ahead. Like, go ahead. You guys, we'll do it right now. This will be fun. Just real quick. You guys, shoot me your shot. What's your definition of aerobic exercise?
Oh, man, I want Jordan to go first.
I thought usually I'm just muted in the background.
No way, you're the most well-rounded one of us. So
Is it based around zone training? Is it getting a heart rate up a particular area? Is it, heart rate? How would you define it, Mike?
I mean, I would say like did you say aerobic training?
Sure. What aerobic exercise, aerobic training, doesn't
Isn't
matter.
it something that
Won't
just
matter.
primarily utilizes fat as a fuel source?
I would
All
say
right, so
any.
you run a marathon, you know what the percentage of energy used during marathons is? About 80% carbohydrate. Okay, so let's try a different one. That failed.
I would say anything that's not sedentary,
Anything that's not sedentary.
just not sitting.
All right, so if I was standing during this conversation, am I doing aerobic exercise?
Maybe
Is
for
it
somebody that hasn't
impossible
stood
to
for a long
answer?
time.
Okay, let's try this. What if I was back squatting 600 pounds one time? Is that aerobic exercise? It's definitely not sitting, not sedentary.
No.
Depending on how heavy the guy is and how out of shape he is, possibly.
You pick your number.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly, I have no idea.
I mean, that
I
would
did one vertical jump. That's more than sedentary. That's aerobic. Certainly not. It doesn't pass the smell
Yeah,
test here, right?
yeah.
What else?
Is it when particular energy systems start to kick in? Once you surpass a 2 minute barrier of actual movement
So
patterns?
if I exercise for 1 minute and 59 seconds, I wouldn't count.
So
So
you're
you see the point here, right? Like there's
yeah,
just doesn't mean anything. It
right.
means literally nothing. We can do the same thing for strength training. What's resistance exercise? You're all resisting gravity right now. Would a pull-up be resistance exercise? It's just you and gravity. Of course it is. Makes sense it is. But then what's the difference between standing? Why is it walking? Like you see
Mhm.
the game we could play here, right? Even something you guys were trying to define athleticism and functional, we'll back all the way up. I can't even define resistance exercise. I don't know what aerobic exercise is. You can put some arbitrary labels on some things to help communication, and that's fine, but we all have to realize like there's no real line there. It is just an arbitrary one we put in there. It's the classic saying of like all systems are wrong, but some are useful, right? It's just we're trying to make it possible to communicate with our other coaching staff, with other scientists, with our clients, and so we put like lines on it just to make again communication possible. But those lines aren't real. They don't mean anything, right? You certainly think that. I mean, look what CrossFit is a great example. You can do nothing but swing kettlebells and deadlift and get a ton of aerobic adaptations, clearly. Right. But then none of us would think like that's aerobic exercise. So at the same token, look at any of the amount of research on steady state endurance exercise, and you'll see a ton of gains in strength and muscle size. But that's like, and so those like arbitrary things they're just meant there to be like entry level stuff. And
Sure.
then from there, like things get way more complicated, but you can't treat it as anything more than that. It's just a rough way for us to allow some sort of exchange of information to be able to get stuff done, but it's not actually as firm as one would think.
Uh, so obviously, coming back to these definitions and how challenging it is, we're creating parameters, right? We're creating ways for us to be able to continue those conversations. And one of the things I heard you speak on with Huberman not that long ago, which obviously those conversations are so in depth and so great. You talk about 9 adaptations of fitness, and the first one on your list is skill. And obviously that's something that we spend a lot of time on. And the examples you give are more about like swinging a golf club or swinging a baseball bat and things that that don't require very much of strength components along with them in some cases. But in like our world, gymnastics and weightlifting, skill development is critical. It's like the backbone of our sport. And I would say the same with weightlifting. But there is a strength component, there is a power component, there's a speed component that go along with it. Do these worlds start to mesh for you when you start thinking about, okay, skill development is a bucket in its own world, but there really is overlap between them quite a bit for someone to actually learn a skill well in a sport like gymnastics or a sport like weightlifting. It's not a siloed learning a skill, it's its own thing, power is its own thing, speed is. There's a lot of overlap. Is that correct in terms of my assumption of if you're teaching a skill that has a strength component that they need to be kind of worked on together?
Is semantics.
Yeah.
Is borderline pedantic. So in the setup of this, okay, one could argue in the sport of weightlifting, you have to move well, but you have to move well powerfully. Sure, but if you don't move well at the beginning, it doesn't matter, right? But you also have to move well powerfully a bunch of different times. So now you're actually all the way into endurance because you have to at least be able to do it 3 times with the few. But in training, you have to do it many, many, many more times, right? And so, yeah, the idea with skill is simply, are you moving the way you're intending to move? Yeah, and you're going to have to do that over force production. You're going to have to do that over fatigue. You're going to have to do that layered in every single way. but you have to be able to move the way you want to move. And of course, inherent in that is also not moving how you don't want to move, right? But it's the same thing. Now, that has to then be repeated over, again, through speed. So moving well at 80% is not the same as 100%. It's not the same as 20%, right? You got to move well across all those dynamics. You have to move well with load. You have to move well when you're not set up in the right positions. You have to move well over fatigue. So it is, I don't actually draw the distinction there, because to me, like, that is still moving well. If you don't move well when you put a load on, you don't move well. You've already crossed skill off the list. You're not moving well, period. You put whatever variable on there you want. Another one would be, yeah, I move well in practice, but I don't do it in competitions. Well, then you don't move well. Like, you only move well, caveat. And so to me, when I say you move well, it means you move well in every circumstance or situation that you're asking yourself to move. That is it. If there's any break in that, then we're back to the fundamental of you're not moving well. Moving well is, in sport context, it's also like, are you breathing appropriately? Is your posture there? Is your foot, like, all of it is still a rough definition of, again, is your body moving or not moving in the way you intend it with the demand you're placing upon it? So you could draw that distinction and say, no, they're different, or you could say clearly they're overlapped. Like, it doesn't really matter. One would say the same thing about, strength endurance. Well, I can't have strength endurance until I have fundamental strength, right? Like, that is required as well. But certainly there are very few scenarios in which all you really care about is being strong one time. Most of our application is going to require some sort of repetition, even, again, in the sport of powerlifting or weightlifting. While you're technically going to have 3 lifts in competition, anybody that has ever done those sports knows you're also going to do a bunch of repetitions at 80%, 85%, 88%, 92%. Like, there will be many lifts that day, even on that day, and then a ton of training. So probably the better way to describe those is that. Like, that is what I mean when I say skill. Actually, I think another distinction that's important here is a lot of people gave me a lot of grief because I didn't include balance in that. Well, to me, it's the same thing. If you're not maintaining balance, you're not moving well, or you're lacking strength. Like, it's one of the two things, right? You're out of position, or you're not strong enough to hold and correct the position. So to me, that's all just folded into the same. Are you lacking this, or are you lacking that? So you could split it up and add other categories. You could do different things with the endurance. You could add more. You can't say I'm right. You can't say I'm wrong. It is just the same thing. Like, it is just trying to get people a rough system so we can understand, hey, don't worry about just being strong, or hey, don't worry about just moving well, because there's other components too. Just because you have a great technique, but you never get tired, there's probably things left on the table. If you have great technique, but you can't do it strong, great. You got great technique, but you can't do it every single time. Well, then you have holes in your game. So that list was the best way I could summarize in my brain. Like, these are the things I think you actually have to have in all areas. But yeah, you could certainly add something to that list of 9, take plenty off, merge some. There could be a lot of ways you could chop that back up. So, but that's how it settles in my brain. For anyone coaching and using that, though, do what works best for you and your brain. If you want to distinguish those things, or your clients aren't getting it, or it's causing confusion, yeah, like, make it work for you. It's just a rough guideline.
Yeah, I mean, they make total sense to me. I wasn't trying to dig at you at all in terms of maybe some grief you've gotten on leaving something like balance out, but
no, it's irrelevant. There's grief. Do whatever you want.
Would you say that initially, if someone's learning a skill, that body weight movements are the best route to go? Obviously, you need to get a handle of how you move before you can put a bat in your hand or put a barbell on your back. Would you say that, I'm trying to move in a direction here to say that gymnastics is better than weightlifting, but would you say that body weight and competency with what you have going on with yourself is critical? Mobility, some being able to get into positions correctly to be able to then utilize them with dynamic action. Would you say that's pretty critical for people to spend time without external load first to learn those skills?
No, I wouldn't say that, because learning can happen in either direction. And the way that I'll say that is, it's really hard to learn how to snatch with a PVC pipe.
Thank you.
Really, really challenging.
Thank you, Andy.
Like, you have to put like some kilos on there to actually learn how to do that. You can't even a lot of people can't even get into a front rack position on a clean with the PVC. Like, they're gonna hold it like this, and like you
put your neck underneath it and you drive your chin into it.
Yeah, you can't learn to swing a golf ball or to swing a golf club at 10%. You can take the golf club out of your hand all you want, and it's not going to do anything until you swing a golf club. So I won't necessarily say that like unloaded is always the best place to start. It can be for certain movements. I have an order kind of which I go through. But I think your point, Dave, is also well taken. The fact that before I'm super concerned about you having a lot of load and fatigue, I want to know, can you do that even actually unloaded? Can you do it well when I give you assistance? Can we do it now with unassistance and body weight? Now can we add these variables like load, like speed, like asymmetry? Can you do that in a single support position versus bilateral, things like that? Those typically come on later, but having coached plenty of people into their first snatch and cleans, you ain't doing that with the PVC pipe only, typically. Certain phases you can pull off the floors, stuff like that, like can be done, but it's really challenging with the PVC pipe. Same thing with throwing a baseball. You
Makes
can't
sense.
just throw your hand.
Sure.
It's going to
Sure.
go different. You put 8 ounces in your finger.
Now, the one that in my mind,
Did that make you feel good, Mike? That help?
Yeah, I
Yes,
have.
Mike feels much better
I
about
want
that.
to, I want to let Dave keep going, but I want to bring something up when we come back
Go
to
ahead,
it.
Mike. Go for it.
All right. I liked, so I got a good visual of something you said there. And, you said you can basically learn it from both ways. So I like that spectrum. And I think it's like easily expressed between Dave and myself. So Dave coming from a gymnastics background, like he really perfected body weight. Which then when he and I play around and I do weightlifting things with him, there's a lot of things that he can do very well because he understands how his body moves. But at the same time, he lacks a good amount of like power from not having trained, with a barbell his whole life. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I never even tried to flip upside down on a trampoline until I was like 27. And then Dave and some of the gymnasts taught me how to do a back tuck. Well, I had a crazy amount of power and explosiveness. So like actually doing the tuck outside of learning the technique was like easy. I had some good falls in there too, so I'm not allowed to do them anymore. But it was like there's like basically what you said. There's not really a perfect. It's just kind of where is somebody at on that spectrum and what do they need more of. So if you kind of isolate into that box is what I'm hearing. If you say like you have to do everything perfect without weight, you might limit a lot of potential growth earlier on. You'll like stunt somebody's growth. Or if you say like, no, there's no value in that like body weight, mobility stuff, you might lose a lot there too. So having that open mind seems to be a theme here.
I fully agree.
I love it, Mike. Speed. This is the one of this list that there's a little glint in your eye when I hear you talk about speed a little bit, because I think it's in some cases lost on a lot of people, not just figuratively, but also literally as we get older, it becomes, from your words, one of the loss factors in longevity. It is critical for us to be able to lead a life of health and athleticism as we get older. And I'm curious from your side, because, I don't work on speed very much. I'm in the gym most days. I don't work on speed, sprinting drills, reaction time exercises, things like that, nearly as much as I probably should. And then for the everyday listener out there, the people that we work with, they probably don't either. And I'm curious if you could give some easy exercises, easy ways for the everyday athlete to be able to incorporate speed into their training, for a way for them to just become a little bit more aware of its importance for longevity.
Yeah, my general tip would be use it at the beginning of your training. Every day you train, if you can, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be every day, but try to incorporate it. If you spend, I don't know, 4 to 8 minutes doing something fast, and you count that as your warm-up, you count that as your activation, then hey, we're probably doing enough there. That I think is the easiest way to incorporate it. You're going to be hard pressed to get a whole bunch of people to go all the way to the gym, to go all the way to the track, to do nothing but a pure speed day and then go home. Like that's just not in the cards for many people, because they're like, I don't have that much time. It takes a long time. There's a lot of rest involved in it. I'm not losing fat. I'm not gaining muscle. I'm not getting stronger. I'm not seeing this here. And I don't really care if I took my 40-yard dash from 7 seconds to 6.5 seconds. Like it's not really a functional thing there. Okay, great. That said, it's very clear it is a skill needed to age as effectively as possible. It's also needed now. Think about the amount of Achilles that are being torn in 30 to 55-year-old people right now. Like they're just snapping left and right. And it's obvious why that's happening. And so mitigating your risk so that you have the ability to do something, whether that is pickleball, pick up basketball, you want to go play golf, a couple of times a year, something that's going to require you to swing or hit as hard or sprint as much as possible. The Achilles, these various connective tissue pieces throughout your body, they need some stimulation. And you can get them by standing and walking a little bit, but you're never going to get that eccentric ability to be snapped and to snap back. And so even if you don't care about being more powerful, if you just want to be able to be a human and sprint and jump and land and fall and handle that, you're on the ladder and it falls and you have to drop 6 feet and land and not, again, tear an Achilles, then some dosage of speed training is very important. Obviously, the bigger issue is the loss of fast twitch muscle fibers with aging. So we know that happens preferentially, mostly because they're not challenged. And so that becomes a real problem with things like sarcopenia, the advanced loss of muscle with aging, or even the ability to catch oneself from a fall. I can't remember the exact data, but if you look at the risk of death after you break a hip over the age of 60, it's something like 75% risk of death the next 10 years. Like it's almost as close to a death sentence as possible. Now, people fall for many reasons. One of them is lack of balance. So don't lose your balance, but you're also going to get tripped. Your dog's going to step out in front of you. You're going to slip on ice, things like that. If you have the foot and hand speed to get that limb out in front of you to brace yourself from a fall a little bit there, you also then need the eccentric strength once you've got it there. But you have to have your foot or hand there in the first place. I promise you, you'd much rather break your wrist than you would your hip when you're 65 years old. So that is critically important to having the ability to do that. You don't need it to be your primary skill. VO2 max, things like that. You want those as high as possible for aging, but you can't have it to be zero either. You're just running a risk of injury. And so really, again, practically, can you do a couple of things? Can this be as simple as 30 seconds of pogo hops? Can it be a speed ladder drill as a warm-up? Can it be some I love group activity classes of like a little bit of almost like middle school basketball. You're starting off the session with just like some agility stuff, like sprint back and forth, a little bit of change of direction, but not maximal. Let's not tear Achilles while we're getting warmed up. But can we do something like that where we can get our bodies moving? A corporation of a little bit of plyometrics, but not as a circuit for fatigue, right? We're not doing box jumps for a minute. Like that's not what we're after here, especially when they're gamified and you're like not there to jump. You're trying to score on an event. Like that's not what we're looking for power and speed production, right? Plyometric push-ups, medicine ball slams, throws, tons of things like that can be done while you're getting warmed up, while you're getting going, turning the system on, getting activated. Very low risk, high reward. Don't take up a lot of equipment. Don't take a ton of learning. There's not a big injury risk to them. Obviously, I'd love it if you throw a barbell over your head a bunch of times. That's pretty rad too. But if you don't, those other ones are plenty of ways you can incorporate that stuff in. So pick a couple of those tools. Again, 5 to 7 minutes of it. Use it as part of your warm-up, then get on to the rest of your training. And that's going to be enough as long as you kind of get that power in different ranges. So try to do something vertically, something rotationally, moving your body, implement it, body weight only, and kind of have a lot of variety there. That's probably your best approach.
You mentioned something right at the end there that I think is another piece that we do a ton in gymnastics, rotation work, and another piece that seems to be lost out on a lot of, CrossFit doesn't do very much rotation work. It's an area that we end up losing a lot of value from. From your perspective, I've heard you talk about, if you simplify strength training into like push-pull rotation was a big part of the way that you think about training. Why, from your perspective, is rotation so critical? And again, a couple of tools that the everyday athlete can kind of implement from a rotational perspective.
Well, most in a sporting context, hopefully that one's pretty easy to understand, right? The athletes we work with, for the most part, so you're talking, PGA and live golfers, obvious one. All of our combat athletes, obvious ones. We work with NFL cornerbacks and quarterbacks, like obvious. So it's not hard tennis players, like for us to run down that list of why rotation is there. For other folks, I would say, you know what's funny? It's been my experience, and I don't have data at all behind this. There may be, I've never really looked, but I feel like people that do more rotational work tend to have less achy backs. And there's something to be said of like, yo, look, you need to disassociate your hip and your shoulders occasionally. And it tends to, like, that stiff low back just starts going away a lot when you spend more time in those areas appropriately. Like, that's just what I've experienced. So it's great. Additionally, you're going to be rotating one way or the other when you're walking. I mean, especially if you're doing sort of any incline or hiking and things like that, you need to have some sort of control or rotation, and you don't want to lose that, especially things like thoracic rotation. As you age and then you can't turn and rotate and wipe your own backside, that's going to be a rotation issue, right? Like, we can make a lot of arguments there. Bigger than all that, though, is, look, it's my position always that full range of motion through all the joints is the default state. Problems start occurring when we lose that default state. So when I say full range of motion through all joints, we recognize not all joints are supposed to go through the same range of motion, right? So keeping with the spine, we obviously know the rotation of the neck is not the same as the low back. Great. So we're not asking our lumbar spine to rotate the same way that our neck. I'm just asking all those joints to stay within their own capability and to not regress, right? If you like joint by joint approach, great. If you hate joint by joint approach, it doesn't matter. You're still going to, like, it still doesn't take a lot of logic to think, great, if I lose rotation in any of those primary joints, especially ones around the hip, there's downstream and upstream effects from that. And then that's not good. And the easiest way to do that is just to keep rotation movement. Flexion and extension tends to happen throughout the day. And in various areas, rotation is one you oftentimes have to go out of your way to get. And that's why I like to encourage it in the training, is because you're going to have to find a way to get into that. And a little bit of that will keep it around for the most part. You're going to get flexion extension in a lot of ways. If you're already working out, you're almost guaranteed to get it. And even just standing, walking, doing our basic stuff, bending over, you'll check those boxes. And so making sure we're going out of our way to get rotation is a big component. And then, also, like, whoever complained about having too strong of a core, like, never, right?
Do you guys do a lot of rotation work in weightlifting?
No.
No, I think you get a double no from this side of which is evidenced by my first assessment from the physios that we have at Power Monkey when I was still competing and training and starting to coach more. And they're like, well, Mike's a good weightlifter. Like, he's got great thoracic extension and rotation. I was like, no, I don't. No, I don't. That's why my elbows hurt.
Yeah.
So from an assessment standpoint, obviously, there's probably parameters that you use for, you're saying full range of motion, but again, that's different for everyone, like how deep someone can get into the spot, what an overhead position looks like for that particular person. How critical is it for someone to find what their baseline looks like to be able to then say 3 months, 6 months, a year, 10 years from now, I'm able to understand kind of where I was? Do we need to have an assessment that's appropriate for that particular person's full range of motion so we have something to kind of continue to come back to?
Yeah, I mean, how else what's normal or not? So this is the problem with whenever we get into this idea of precision exercise, precision mobility, precision nutrition, precision anything else. It is always about, like, where's that passport for you, right? And so in the case of blood work, we're looking at biological passports. In the case of movement, it's the same thing, right? What's your movement passport is how we get to it. And so if you come in and say, hey, look, I'm now having these problems in my neck, in my back, and wherever else that I never had before. Okay, that's great. I don't know if there's any dysfunction here. Because if that is the normal range of motion that you've had, say, in your thoracic spine for 25 years and you've never had pain, I can't go in and run you through an FMS and go, oh, it's your thoracic extension, that's your problem. It might be, and if I had nowhere else to go, like, I would probably start there too. But it also might be like, well, I don't know. Having baseline immediately enables me to go, look, maybe that's a normal position for you. That's actually fine. That's not causing the issue. It's we got to go look somewhere else. So having that is such a high reward, low risk, low output activity. Now, when we do this in our folks, we do not use a standard a screener or like that or anything for 1,000 reasons, right? I'm not expecting the shoulder and the scapula to do the same thing in a Major League Baseball pitcher as it is even in a fighter, right? So if you run them both through a standardized test, you put them through an overhead squat, you're gonna give potentially really bad advice to those people, right? I don't need my MMA fighters to have the same range of motions as a weightlifter. Like, it's not even close, right? I don't even need a powerlifter to be the same positions as a weightlifter. Certainly, let alone now taking that to a golfer. Like, it's completely different. And so, like, all that standard stuff goes out. We never pay attention to those things. What we're really looking for is there something that's going to be explaining of dysfunction and pain or limited performance? And so understanding how the shoulder blade works in a pitcher is different than even somebody like a fighter who's punching with that right shoulder. It's just a different thing, right? The asymmetries that come with a professional golfer, like, it's way different than a distance runner. So like I can't all assess them at the same thing. But to your point, Dave, having a baseline is critical for all of them. Because now I start to see what happened. The good example of this was John Rahm last year. Did great, won the Masters, and we were having issues there. We have such detailed analysis of exactly how he's moving. You may not know, but he's got a club foot in his right foot. And so his backswing, if you guys know anything about golf, is really, really short, and it's crazy despite the fact that he bombs the golf ball relative to other golfers. His entire approach is completely different because of a genuine anatomical change in his there. Now, he started having some issues on the tee, and his coach, Dave Phillips, was able to figure out, okay, actually we're losing him and Spencer Tatum were able to figure out we're losing some movement in some of these areas, and it's causing us to be slightly off, like such a level off that no one would ever notice it without really high-speed cameras and just their strong coaching eyes. Able to get that squared away and then got him back up there. So it just has to be super specific, not only to the sport, but the actual individual person. That only comes with actual coaching, though. Like, you actually have to coach people and coach the individual for a long time. And in their case, they've been coaching Rahm since he was like 17 or something. So they got a decade of data to go back to and to really be able to say this is exactly what's happening. Last thing I'll say is, like, and another example of something we do here is we'll often do things like what's called the Springbok analysis. So Springbok is it's a full body MRI. We can get a volumetric analysis of each individual muscle, edema, scar tissue, and things like that. Is muscle size going to tell you a ton about injury and potential? Maybe, right? You can imagine a situation in which the right glute is 40% larger than the left glute. Okay, you're probably going to predict some dysfunction and pain, like, somewhere, right? But what about 10%, 8%, 6%? I don't know. Like, I don't know where that line is because it's not telling you anything about function. That said, when we have that scan year after year after year, and we start seeing changes, yeah, there you go. There's Springbok, right? It's like, okay, we're seeing this development happen. We're seeing this change happening. And now if that's matching symptomology or change in performance, we have phenomenal baseline to come back and go, okay, this was not normal for you. This has been happening over time, and now we have real course for intervention. So things like that allow us to really understand what's happening to people over time and understand, most importantly, when it's just a false positive or false finding, or versus it's actually leading to either, again, the injury or reduced performance. But without that analysis, like, I don't know how much you can glean and how much action you should take in somebody with just like a one-time shot there. So yeah, I mean, baseline's everything.
Yeah.
Same thing for bloods too. Hormone profiles, like everything, man. Before diving into TRT, because you have low testosterone, you better know what's normal.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, with the athletes that you work with, you're working with experts, you're working with professionals, you're working with people that have access to these things. Most of the people that we come across don't, right? It's the person just working out a few days a week, and they would love to figure out a way to find a baseline for themselves. Is it as easy, if you want to use that word, as just finding a coach who's capable of putting the individual attention into you to find a baseline that's correct for you? Or is there something that you can filter down from what you've learned with working with Rahm and other professional athletes? They say, hey, there's some things that we can put into the everyday athlete that are also good metrics to use as a baseline.
The way that I'd say it is everything is on scale, right? So some of the stuff that we're able to use for our athletes and our executive clients, when we put together these like really extensive packages and these comprehensive programs. Okay, that's great. Not applicable to everybody. Some people can't afford and have somebody in their area who is a talented, whether they're a physio or a chiro or a strength coach or an AT or something like that, or none of those things, but just a really good coach. Right. That might not even be accessible or affordable for other ones. So everything is on scale, right? So you have to just do something. Is I guess what I'm trying to say here is like, will you have access to the best? No. So what do you have access to? Then do that. Right. If you don't have access to any of those things and you can just get an again, nothing wrong or for FMS. Great. Can you find somebody at a local gym that has like done a 2-day certification and can do that on you? Well, it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Like it's absolutely better than nothing. Is that the same as like going to work with one of you three individually? No, I would say get their butts down there to your spot. Like have you spend a day on them? That would be better. But that may not be in the cards. Can you get something else? So instead of worrying about like, I don't have access to the best and the best, do whatever you can.
Yeah.
Get something. You recognize there's some more error there. Practitioner wasn't a world expert in it. Okay, fine. So we'll just take that grace into account, but it's still better than nothing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hate that this hour is going by quickly. I have a ton more questions, but there's one I really want to get into if we can jump into some grip strength conversation. And, one of the things that Dr. Peter Attia was talking about, two important metrics that he uses with his clients to be a determining factor for longevity is VO2 max and grip strength. And, I've heard you talk about the importance of VO2 max and cardiovascular fitness for longevity and things like that. Awesome. Grip strength is an interesting one to me. I'm curious what metric we use to say that grip strength can be predictive for longevity. I've seen you do some studies, and I want to go into some of the asymmetry studies you've done around grip strength specifically, but why is grip strength important? What does it tell us in terms of longevity, if there's anything specific there?
Yeah, so there's more here than people realize. A lot of people will hear that and initially say, well, it's just a proxy. Generally healthier people are probably also going to be generally stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very short-sighted. We have so much data to support that is not the only thing happening here. It is clearly also true, like no doubt. And so there is just a correlation. But you could say the same thing for muscle size. You could say the same thing for body composition. But no one would argue, well, body composition doesn't really matter. Generally healthy people are leaner. Like, yeah, of course. But also, like, there's causation here as well. So where do we get these data? You initially think here's typically where the story starts. You do big, what are called epidemiological research. So there's a thing called the UK Biobank. So it's a really cool project that they did. They put about 500,000 people into the study database in the UK. Started in 2012 or something like that, opened in 2017. And then they just started saying, hey, we're going to have these big databases. We're going to test blood cholesterol levels and blood pressure and VO2 max and body composition and strength and mental health and like all these things and, see who lives and dies. And then people can go in there and data mine. Okay, that's great. America's done the same thing with called NHANES, right? We've had that for 30 plus years, and there's all kinds of cohorts in these projects. So when you do those things like that, you end up getting studies with 100,000 people, 600,000 people. Some have had like 1.1 million people in them. And you start seeing associations. And one of the ones that popped up years ago was like, wow, people that are stronger tend to live longer. Okay, great. Again, at this point, just association. And what is a type of strength test one could do when you're trying to enroll 600,000 people in a study across the entire country? It's going to be something simple like a grip strength test. We're not going to do a front squat test. Like it's going to be, hey, can you do this right now? There's no training. There's no warm up. We're eliminating technique and, cueing and motivation and music, like all these variables. Like, let's just do grip strength. All right, great. Now it started there. And then people started to get really interested. Like, well, is there something actual here? And you started more and more research and you started following up and you're saying, okay, great. There's associations between grip strength and cognitive function. Interesting. In fact, we published a study last year. One of the ones you may be alluding to. This is Tommy Wood led this project out of NHANES and found association between leg strength and actual cognitive function. We have actually a project right now where we can measure muscle quality through 4 blood markers, molecular biomarkers, and we can actually predict muscle quality Alzheimer's risk and cognitive function through aging. And it's from databases like this. We're actually now in the process of running it through an actual intervention study right now. So it's like, you want to make the argument about correlation? Fine. We're running it through a causation project right now. And if that pans out like we would imagine it would, then we have that there. Well, you have tons of research on actual causation. You have training studies. You have other functions. Now, why does it directly matter? So hopefully we can put that to bed. Well, a couple of things. Number one, if you lose grip strength, this is your direct interface with the world. Okay, you can't carry groceries. You can't you can't walk through an airport. You're less likely to travel. That becomes a huge problem because when people start to lose I'm bringing on place, but one of the strongest predictors of social isolation is when people feel like they're a burden on society. It's one of the strongest ties to mental health through aging. If you can't carry stuff on your own, if you can't survive and transport yourself, you feel like you're a huge burden. Your mental health just plummets. You stop doing things. That atrophy leads to social isolation, leads to less physical activity, leads to worse choices, and snowballs down into worse health. So you can't interface with the world. We have problems. You stop doing things. Secondarily, and probably more directly, these are what we call indirect, by the way. Direct measures are things like, okay, how does one become strong in the first place? Muscles have to fire, so there has to be some muscle fiber type, contraction, there are things like that. But it is also in large part a nerve conduction issue. And so if I'm becoming weaker, I'm losing neural capabilities. Your nervous system is your brain. And so we see an equal start to shut down is like, this is actually a proxy for physical brain health, not mental health, physical brain health, because what we're seeing is a dysfunctional, deteriorated, a denervated neurological system in general. And that's why it is a direct measure. It's not a one-to-one, but it is a direct measure at the group level, at the population level of brain health. And again, taking a look at any of Tommy's work or any number of people there, you have so much research to pull from this. And then Tommy's other paper that I wasn't involved with, again, showing that direct relationship to physical brain health is pretty clear. So you could go on and on about that, but I think continuing to like pass that off as like, well, it's just healthier people or have stronger grip. It's like, okay, great. Then I guess you don't believe exercise is healthy either. So like, fine. Like I'm just not interested in having that debate on Twitter. Like, phenomenal.
Right.
Good luck. Like,
yeah, it's fascinating. The asymmetry component of it, which you've shown some studies on, that if your grip strength is asymmetrically strong, that it also leads to potentially increased by over 2.5 times sarcopenia later in life. That seems to be incredibly interesting as well. It's not just your grip strength, but it's about symmetry as well with grip strength. Can you mention that as well?
yeah, so we want to be a little bit careful. You're talking about a single paper at this point. Super interesting, but let's see if it pans out. Okay, from multiple studies, multiple labs, always the case. In this case, what they're looking at was over 10% asymmetry between right hand, left hand, right? And so if you can imagine let's say 50 kilo grip strength squeeze or so, and then if you're more than 10% off, so 45 or less, maybe an early sign of significant risk of sarcopenia, as you mentioned. So something to pay attention to. Is also in that particular study, they looked at, again, more molecular blood markers and identified a handful of proteins circulating that are associated with negative brain health, is the way that we'll put it, and particularly things that are suggestive of nerve denervation. And so that is particularly interesting. I think what you're seeing there, outside of intentional asymmetry development, by that I mean, imagine you're a plumber. You're going to have some asymmetry. You're probably doing a lot more work on your strong hand than the other one. Imagine you have some sort of lifestyle or vocation. Obviously, you drive a motorcycle for a living, like things like that, where you're using one grip differently than the other ones. That's like driven. Okay. But outside of that, especially if it's not correctable, then you're starting to see signs of saying, okay, looks this like we're losing some functionality in that side of our arm, that entire limb, which is a pretty good proxy of what's going on in the brain as well. That's really what that initial paper was trying to find.
How is the grip strength tested? Is it through, holding something for a period of time? Is it done through?
It's almost always maximum, 1 rep maximum strength. via hand grip dynamometer.
Okay.
So you grab a thing, squeeze it as hard as you can, get
Yep.
that number up as high as possible, and then done there. So that's almost always the research application.
What are your thoughts on hanging in general as an athlete and for general population, building grip strength? Is the reason why I bring it up is because I heard Dr. Stuart McGill recently talk about pros and cons to hanging. Specifically around spinal health. You know, there's some athletes that potentially won't benefit so much from that traction type of movement pattern if there's something structurally going on in there. But in my mind, hanging is just a phenomenal exercise for most people to be working on, grip strength and otherwise. Is hanging something that you incorporate into your training with your athletes at all?
Yeah, we certainly do it. You know, Stu would know more about that actual specific scenario for spinal health than I would default to him or other folks there. But yeah, we do it. We don't get to do it a ton, to be honest, because a lot of our folks can't get in that position.
Mm.
You know, you're talking about career fighters. The shoulder doesn't go that far a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
But we like to use it when possible. We also don't have grip issues with those people really. Like their grip
Okay.
strength is enormous generally, and their grip endurance is also very, very high. So we don't get a ton out of that. But other folks, especially our again, our executive clients, when possible, we will easily and happily integrate that in because it is such a quick. I'll say this way. I think it's actually best case for non-athletes in the sense that it's such high reward and for so many different things typically that, and it's also like less cueing and less specificity. Just like grab there and hang. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna get a lot of wins out of this. Like done without much work. So yeah, we love it.
All right, awesome. That's good to hear. I have one more question for you from my end. Mike, you can jump in. Jordan, I know we have a ton on this list, but the last one that I had for you was around isometric work, and it's a big part of our world in the gymnastics piece of holding positions perfectly, like we talked about from earlier. There's an artistic component of making sure something looks good, but we have a lot of isometric work within the training that comes along with gymnastics, and I heard you talk about some real strong benefits that come with isometric work, how you do it, holding positions for up to 5 minutes in some cases, which I think shocked Dr. Peter Attia when you told him the hold the position for that long. But I want to talk first, get your thoughts on just where the benefits are around isometric work, but then also taking it to an extreme, which we can talk about. And in some cases, and this is more of just a personal question, but holding positions for extreme amounts of time, and if there are benefits other than just being kind of a circus freak show type of a thing. So if we could just dive a little bit into isometric work in general, how you implement it and the benefits of it, and then a little bit more towards the extreme of whether or not there are benefits the longer you hold.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'm not sure
Mm-hmm.
which direction you want to go there. But I would say this is an area I have warmed up to in the last 7 or 8 years more than I was early in my career, coming from combat sports and football and weightlifting, just like very little concern, like for
Sure.
isometrics. And then now started thinking about it more, obviously, more recently, and thinking, look, step number one to controlling moving well is under that motor control, right? Like, do you actually aware, can you control? But then a big part of that is, can you actually just stabilize? And that's, you call that isometrics, stability, like tomato in this case, right? And so going, all right, great. Well, if we're expecting a certain joint to not move when it's not supposed to move, that needs to have an isometric component. So in fact, training for isometrics is great there. In also the fact that working with more high profile clients where you can't get them insanely sore. We can't beat them up because their football load or their golf load, like it's so high, you can't really crush them. Isometrics are a great way to get a lot of force production done in a way that doesn't get them, especially force production done over a extended range of motion. And so when I'm talking about here isometrics, I'm generally not talking about really short or partial range of motion. There's a lot of isometrics at end range of motion. And so you're driving flexibility, you're driving mobility, you're holding position and strength in that newfound range of motion. That's really like our biggest use case example of it, right? Now we're seeing a ton of improvements where like static stretching wasn't necessarily filling that bucket for a lot of our folks. Now, in terms of like holding time, what you're also seeing there is That's about the only way we have any evidence on for training connective tissue health. And so it's like, okay, great. If we're trying to either reduce injury, come back from injury, or do something for connective tissue, probably just bouncing out of the bottom as fast as possible is not our only, solution, which was, me for all the years, right? Which is just like, who cares? Transition as fast as possible. So probably not the best. Isometrics are great. They're also a really nice way to kind of kickstart training, getting in those first couple of weeks and getting moving, because you can control things. You can get to high fatigue that's not damaging with very low risk of joint discomfort. And you can set failure not by concentric eccentric, but you can set failure by position loss. And that is a really big win, right? So it's like, we're going to hold this position here. And as soon as we get out of position, whatever that thing is for us, then that's our sign. And that's what we're building our first handful of weeks back into training is positional awareness and positional quality through fatigue. Once you can do that, now I'm okay loading you and doing some other stuff because I know you're just going to break down the second you get tired. And rather than saying like, we're going to do this for a certain rep range, where people just get that rep range locked in their head, right? And they just want to finish the rep range or the set range or the load. It is now just all about quality. Like, can you hold this position appropriately when you get tired? When you fail, how do we fail? So like that is a large part of how we go about isometrics. So like, how long do you extend that one? I mean, I'll be candid. I don't really see too many times when we go to like 5-minute isometrics anymore, but you can. There's no reason. We're probably not going more than a few minutes typically. That said, last thing I'll say here is actually one of those like extended cases is when we're working around injury. Then I have no problem being like, the only way we can progress here is not with load, not by repetition, but by duration. And I have no problem really pushing that number out there. And that's happened numerous times for us, where it's like, fine, that's how we're going to progress. Like, that's how we're going to train. That's how we're going to keep getting better, because we're pre-surgery right now. And we're going to train as hard as we possibly can going into surgery, or some other joint is severely compromised, or like some other things going on. So it is another effective mode that you can use as another skill, as another tool rather, and deploy it as not probably our first line of attack very often, but it's always something there that we can pull from. It's kind of like curcumin. Like, yeah, it's cool. Like, I'm not putting it on everything. It's not our first spice, but like curcumin or something.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
It's there. It's a nice addition. Well, the thing that I kind of really appreciated you mentioning there, which I think maybe deserves one or two more words on, is the benefit that isometrics have on connective tissue.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about speed and how, people introducing speed have a tendency to blow out an Achilles or, blow out a bicep tendon relatively quickly when their connective tissue is not prepped. And this is where we spend a lot of time prepping our connective tissue in the gymnastics world through isometrics. The balance of speed and hold positions help each other out a little bit there, right?
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
So to be able to take advantage of the speed, we need to be able to hold positions in those full ranges a little bit longer to then get the benefits of what speed can actually give us.
Yeah, no, thank you for that distinction. That's a really good call. So here's how I'll say it. It looks like to make any significant progress in the connective tissue itself, we're probably looking at least a 60-second plus contraction.
Okay.
Okay. Tons of work needed on that area, but that's kind of what we're looking at. That said, with the speed stuff, if you don't have any tissue tolerance for fast eccentric concentric exchange, then you're likely to blow something there. And so that part is really tissue tolerance rather than actual connective tissue enhancement, if that distinction makes sense. So you need to dose those things so that you don't lose the ability to do anything without blowing out an entire piece of tissue, but really actually strengthening or providing additional actual size to connective tissues. It's probably, at this point, looks like 60 seconds plus of contraction. One more time, though, do want to reiterate, there is a megalith of research still needed on that. Connective tissue is really, really, really lowly understood. And so that tune may change in years to come, but as far as we understand it now, that's about all we have to go on. And it's not an extensive database at all, but that's the best we know so far.
Awesome. Fascinating stuff, and all stuff that, we'll continue to watch the research on. I'm sure you're going to be doing impressive studies moving forward in a lot of these areas. Mike, anything you want to jump in with before we get Andy out of here? We don't want to keep him longer than we need.
No, Andy, we have to have you on for like just a weightlifting only podcast or something where we can go into some anecdotes and stuff. Almost everything you're talking about, there's like a situation I want to talk about from, either a a long time ago, whether it was a training partner or myself, or current with, clients that we're working with. But in general, just from my side of things, is like a holistic thank you for being a very open-minded talker that gives a lot of perspective to things that, yeah, just continuously get polarized. And it's very frustrating for me as someone who tries to stay open-minded and likes to assume that there's, more than two sides to most coins when we're looking at these things. So, for listeners that are unfamiliar with you, I would highly recommend that, when they see your name on a podcast or on a book or anything, to make sure they perk up and just, keep doing what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
So Andy, before we get you out of here, we had you on a while ago. I want to see if anything's changed. So we got a couple of quick questions for you, if that's cool.
Sure.
Sport or discipline that you prefer, weightlifting or gymnastics? Easy one for you.
Yeah, don't even. Easy. Next.
Two for two. Love it.
Anyone you've come across recently that might be a good interview for us? Someone that you respect in the field, or someone that has a good perspective on the things that we discuss?
Yeah, 1,000 people.
Yeah.
I brought up Tommy. Tommy would be great. I actually think Tommy just spoke at the CrossFit Health Summit.
Okay.
Or something like that. So he's always a great one, particularly about brain health and stuff like that. But neuroscientist who's also a bro scientist. So.
All right, fantastic. And lastly, if you are a book reader, any book you've been reading or have read recently that's worth passing along? If not, a TV show or a movie that you found to be interesting or worthwhile to pass along?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of them actually. One of them is sitting right here. Candidly, I have not yet read it actually, but I did purchase it. This is my friend Tommy Lundberg. We were both doctoral students at the same time. We crossed paths. He wrote this book. I bought it. He didn't send it to me for free, even though I know him. He should have. Tommy, cheap bastard. But this is actually called The Physiology of Resistance Training. It is like a classic textbook. And the reason I bought it is I'm yet to encounter any actual textbook directly on the physiology of strength training and resistance training. And so that is awesome because I get asked that question 1 trillion times. They're all, any of you know, like most exercise physiology textbooks are just like resistance exercise gets very little love in them. So to have like a classic book on that is great. And Tommy is a wealth of knowledge and really understands the field. So different Tommy Lundberg. I'm sure he'll yeah, he's a Sweden. Well, he's at Karolinska Institute in Sweden. But the book is, I bought it on Amazon or something.
Can you repeat the name of that book, please?
Yeah, it's called The Physiology of Resistance Training by Tommy Lundberg.
Awesome.
It's great. He's done a lot of really cool research recently, actually. Tommy's probably going to be single-handedly one of the people, not single-handedly, that's too much, but a major driver in kind of changing a lot of IOC policies on things like testosterone and stuff like that. He's done a ton of, he'd be a great interview too, actually. I don't know if he'll do it, but you could reach out to him and tell him I said to do it. But awesome. He explained to you some of the things he's done the last 5 or so years in his lab. It's really fascinating stuff.
Well, not for nothing, but your name carries a lot of weight because last time you recommended Lenny Wiersma, and when we reached out to him, he's like, normally I don't do these things, but if Andy said so, then yeah, I'll do it. And he came on. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
You should hit him back again. He's actually now at Cal Berkeley.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. He pieced out and retired at Fullerton, and he's up at Berkeley now.
All right.
Still has a terrible taste in sport teams, but that's okay.
Well, Andy, thanks again for the time. You have so many things going on. Where do we want to direct our listeners to? Where can they find you with what is kind of present and top of the list for you?
Yeah, Instagram and Twitter for science communication are the easiest way. I also announced recently I have my own special podcast coming out called Perform with Dr. Andy Galpin, and that'll be out in the next few months, depending on when this thing comes out. It's going to be a little bit different. It's a different setup, different format, not your typical weekly sort of podcast thing. So tune into that. We also have of course, our coaching programs at Rapid Health and Performance. And then last week, we announced and released our high performance blood work program at Vitality Blueprint. And then we have, of course, our sleep program at Absolute Rest. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, we actually have a course to help people design and write their own training and nutrition programs at biomolecularathlete.com. If all that was too much of a mess, I think you can just go to my personal website, and it's probably all on there as well. So just Google my name. There'll be more than a few things that'll pop up.
It's amazing, man. Congrats on all the success. Keep it going. Thank you for taking the time with us today. We really appreciate it. We said we know how busy you are, and hopefully we get a chance to actually hang out in person sometime soon.
Yeah, we'd love to, guys. Thanks a lot.
Take care. For all the listeners out there, please be sure to head over to powermonkeyfitness.com for services and upcoming events. Check out our Instagram pages for regular teaching and technical content at Power Monkey Fitness, at Dave Durante, and at Mike Service. On behalf of Power Monkey Fitness, we're your hosts. I'm Dave Durante with my co-host Mike Service. And until next time, thank you all for listening.